You are listening to the Foreign Policy Focus podcast.
We cannot wait for the final proof. The smoking gun could come in the form of a mushroom cloud.
Haven't you driven enough people from their homes already? Bulldoze their villages, seize their property and their laws. They had no part in making it.
Now working in Libya with friends and allies, we've demonstrated what collective action can achieve in the 21st century.
Now the host of the show, Kyle Inslee.
Happy New Year's, everyone, and welcome to episode 437 of the Foreign Policy Focus podcast. As I'm recording this show in the first few hours of 2020, I think it's fitting to kind of look at the year ahead. So I'll be doing that not only for the wars and the U.S. foreign policy, but also what I have planned for the show. And of course, the big headline of the day of Iraqi protesters storming the U.S. embassy in Baghdad. I'll be sure to cover all that and explain why I think's going on there. So please, as you did through 2019, continue to share the show. You know, the show did grow in 2019, and I know I'm not the best at self-promotion and getting the word out there about my own show, but continues to grow because all of you have taken the time to recommend it. You know, it always is really encouraging to me when I see the show, shared on somebody's page, or, I'm in one of those Facebook groups and people say, hey, check out this Foreign Policy Focus show if you want good news. So that kind of stuff really is huge. And if you could keep doing it, it really makes a difference. You go to the Libertarian Institute on the homepage there. I write the daily news roundup, and then the show has its own little featured spot as well. The URL there is libertarianinstitute.org. If you're a new listener to the show, make sure you subscribe to it somewhere. It's up everywhere people listen to podcasts. There is a Libertarian Institute all podcast feed where you can find my show, The Scott Horton Show, Free Man Beyond the Wall. But the show also has its own podcast feed if you're just interested in what I'm saying. And then you could donate to the show at patreon.com/foreignpolicyfocus. I really do appreciate the donors through 2019. You're the people that, helped me to cover all the costs for the show. So, while I'm not getting payment for my time, I am at least not on the hook for all the hosting fees and every other, kind of hardware or software thing I need to make the show come out in the quality it does. So thank you very much for making that all possible. If you've been thinking about donating, please go ahead and make that decision. It will help the show to, be improved over time, and I could use that money for advertising, buying better equipment, maybe better audio software so I can improve the quality of that a little bit. Let me know what you want to hear too. If you are somebody who donates to the show, send me a message, say, hey, I'm donating to you, and if you could get a better mic one of these days, that would really be great. So anyways, point of that, thank everybody who donated in 2019, and please think about doing that in 2020. All right, so I'm starting with this story about Iraq, because I like talking about the news more than I like talking about my show. So kind of got to go back a week or so to see the kind of origins of this story, but there's thousands of U.S. troops in several bases in Iraq. One of these bases is in Iraqi Kurdistan, and there were U.S. soldiers and U.S. contractors being housed there. These Department of Defense contractors are, security mercenaries, hold a gun, what people think about when they think about Blackwater. I'm guessing they also have some contractors there doing more civilian type duties as well. And so I don't know the role of this particular contractor, but some shelling, 30 rockets, I believe, were launched at the base. It killed one American, and injured some Iraqi forces and at least one other American. The U.S. responded to this attack as it had responded to the dozen or so similar attacks this year. The one big difference being that an American was killed in this one, which wasn't, I don't believe, the case in any of the previous attacks. And that was, the Americans pointed the finger at Iran. They said this was an Iranian hatched, kind of plan that they used their militia force to do this. Iran denied those charges. The U.S. hasn't presented any particular proof that Iran was somehow behind this attack, or even that the militia that they decided to accuse had actually carried out the attack. So I don't see any reason to believe that. Elijah Menier, who is, the great Iraqi correspondent, did say that he thought this was the remnants of ISIS that carried out this attack. So I wouldn't concede that it was a Shia militia at all. which would imply maybe there's some backing there by Iran. But even that doesn't mean that that's the reason this group carried out the attack. If it was the alleged group, the alleged group is the Kataib Hezbollah. And, because Hezbollah is the second half of the name, of course, that, sends everybody's, brain into, oh no, Iran mode. And this was definitely the Iranians. That's not the case. As like saying every conservative group that has liberty or freedom in their name are all linked and backed by Charles Koch or something like that. That's just not the case. So, if it was this particular militia, they probably did receive some support and funding from the Iranians. At the same time, they were part of the Popular Mobilization Forces that fought against ISIS in Iraq from, 2014 to 2018, with American support. So, it's not like you couldn't also call this an American backed militia, at least at one point. So again, the U.S. made this statement. Similar statements have been made throughout the year, and I wasn't particularly concerned that the U.S. was going to do anything. But I was wrong, and the U.S. ended up carrying out an attack against 3 targets they say were related to the Kataib Hezbollah, in killing 25 of their members, including 4 commanders. Now, there's some discrepancy here. I've seen other reports saying that only 9 members of the militia were killed, and then the other, that'd be 16 people, I hope I did my math right there, were either Iraqi forces, Iraqi police, or other militiamen. I don't know how to decipher the truth there, but those are the, kind of 2 alternate reports that you have to go on. Either way, this was a big deal. Iraqis, I think fairly, at least in Shia stand, universally, came out and condemned this. I saw condemnations, from the president, who's actually occurred, the prime minister, who is just in a caretaker's role right now, but he's a Shia, Ayatollah Sistani, the Iraqi Ayatollah, he came out and condemned it. Sadr, came out and condemned. So there's a ton of condemnation. And then on the streets, the protesters go and start protesting outside of the U.S. Embassy. Eventually, they start to try to get into the embassy compound. So imagine, you have several buildings, but, you can't just walk into them from the street. There's walls and guards, shats outside of it. You can actually find it on Google Earth if you want to look it up and just kind of have an idea of what happened. So the protesters definitely got inside of the compound. Once they were in there, they at least did quite a bit of, vandalism and damage to one of the guard shats. I'm not sure if they were actually able to break inside of it, but, they're banging massive rods against these, shatterproof and I'm sure blast windows and stuff like that. So probably absolutely destroying, I believe, the most expensive embassy that the U.S. has ever built, and destroying a lot of the property there. The protesters were then able to get inside of at least one embassy building and get into some kind of lobby area. As this was all unfolding, some people were starting to talk about, what happened with Iran in 79 and the revolution there. My thought was, I have to imagine however the U.S. designed this compound, an embassy in Iraq, they made sure that they couldn't end up in a similar position. And so my guess would be is that they would have enough different exit routes and ways to lock down the building and the compound, that it's not like the protesters are going to come in and take these people hostage. And even if it means by helicoptering people off the roof, I didn't imagine a situation where, these people would actually become hostages. I thought very worse is they may literally be chased out of the embassy. A lot of graffiti was spray painted around the embassy, and I just thought this showed kind of probably what the protesters were saying and feeling, which was it was closed by the people. They're tired of this relationship that the government, the Americans installed in their country, has with the Americans. And it's time for the Americans to leave. They've killed enough Iraqis. And, we could just look at this since 2003 on, but I'm sure for the Iraqis, as Thomas Knapp wrote a really good article on recently, it's been 28 years of U.S. bombing and sanctions and starvation campaigns for them. Anyways, it kind of all quells after they get into the lobby and can't get any further. I heard some tear gas was sprayed, and some people were shot, about 10 people were shot with live ammunition. No confirmations on that. looking at the protesters, I didn't see anybody armed with anything other than like a stick, a flag, a rock. And they were specifically using it for, vandalism reasons to try to break into, a building, a guard shack or something like that. But it didn't seem like there was any intent by the protesters to actually harm any human beings here. There were a few people around in fatigues, and I saw reports that these were members of the militia that was bombed. I have no confirmation on that, but even the people in fatigues, I didn't see, rifle slung over the shoulder or even, holster weapons, on the side or anything like that. And I'll mention that I didn't see any of those people actually inside of the embassy compound in any of the videos, but rather on the street. So, people in fatigues on the streets, whether that means they're militiamen or not, is still at least a little bit of a question mark. In response, the U.S. has deployed more forces. They showed all these videos of, Ospreys coming in and dropping off Marines. I saw one report that said 750 additional soldiers will be deployed to Iraq. That seems like a lot. And that if you need to deploy 750 to defend your embassy, then that seems quite absurd. I will also mention that New Year's Day, as I woke up and was preparing to record this episode, I did notice on Twitter that the protests had again started outside the U.S. Embassy and that the U.S. was deploying tear gas. So yesterday, unsure of who maybe fired on any of these protesters, as there's reports of 10 people being shot and tear gas fired, over if that was Iraqi security forces or American forces. Today, it's pretty clear that those are American forces. So obviously, as far as the protests go, I'll continue to talk about this. I think it's an absolutely huge story through the week. But now I want to talk about this story in like kind of the really big picture and what happened, because I'm fairly certain it was Elijah Manier that was reading on Twitter made a very critical point, or at least it was a tweet that he retweeted. And that was, recently we've had all these protests in Iraq. 450 people have died. And because of the position that the Iranians took towards that protest, a lot of the hate of the people and the protesters was actually directed towards Iran. So while this is, a country that's gained a huge amount, Iran, who's gained a huge amount of influence in Iraq, since the U.S. overthrow of Saddam Hussein, allowing the Shia majority in that country, who, feel, somewhat, while Iraqi nationalism and nationality is very important, and there's a big difference between Iraqi Shia and Iranian Shia. Some are Arabs and some are Persians. There is a kinship there and an influence that Iran was able to gain over Iraq because of the Shia majority in the country and the fact that the U.S. killed Saddam Hussein. And many of the Shia exiles from Iraq during the Saddam era had been supported by and living in Iran. So there's a lot of history there and stuff that this is the reason why Iran becomes powerful after that. But, again, more recently in 2019, they had kind of lost and seemed like, especially among the people who were out protesting, these young, politically unaffiliated Iraqi nationalist type of men, they didn't seem particularly happy with the Iranian influence, as much, if not even more than the American influence. They attacked the Iranian consulate in Basra at one point. But the United States overreacted so much to this killing of a U.S. contractor at the Kirkuk base, especially since, they've provided no proof that this militia is behind it, and went ahead and carried out these airstrikes, apparently without the permission of the Iraqi government, hit them. There's also 2 strikes carried out in Syria, but one in Iraq. Nonetheless, this Shia Iraqi militia that fought against the Islamic State, I'm guessing is the type of group that has some popularity among the people of Iraq, in the sense that, well, these guys killed ISIS for us. And it was just a step too far, for the Iraqi people. And so all of kind of the hate that people had, and that was, maybe a little bit directed towards Iran this time, completely just shifted around towards the United States. And, again, it's almost like they can't screw up any more than they are, the people who determine and set U.S. foreign policy. Like, they couldn't do things in Iraq more to empower Iran, and I think this was another one of those steps. So I just want to also put that event in this picture. All right, I think that's all I have on for now, but especially if these protests continue. This, will be a theme talked about on the show in 2020. And with that, let's talk about 2020. So, unfortunately, I don't know how much the wars are going to improve in the coming year. I think the year is going to be defined by the coming election. My guess is that every pundit that appears, especially on every center-ish or left-wing news channel, is going to call the 2020 elections the most important elections in our lifetime. And I think probably even a larger number than usual will claim it's the most important election in the history of the nation. They'll call it the election for the soul of the nation. Now, I think the problem is that when the people say that, they're not going to say, because we need to get back in the Iran deal, because we need to find a way to extend the New START treaty and develop some arms control space demilitarization with Russia and China. We need to make a deal with North Korea. We need to get troops out of Afghanistan. Those aren't going to be the crises that people talk about. My guess is that they're going to, especially these people in the mainstream that I'm talking about here, Russiagate, probably Trump being mean to people, mocking people, things that I'm not saying are great, but compared to slaughtering children, him mocking, a young climate activist really doesn't rise to the same level. And so they're going to focus on the kinds of things that are kind of politics in the U.S., but don't impact the grand scheme of the U.S. empire. Now, with that, I think there is going to be the opportunity for us to raise the issues, and it's just going to be a matter of how people respond and what catches on. I mean, there's the great libertarian Jacob Hornberger is has announced he's running for the LP nomination. And if he gets that could be a platform that he could use to push the war issues. There's certainly the possibility that if not Donald Trump, someone could take up the position that, I'm going to get U.S. troops out of Afghanistan or something. Like Trump would have the power to do it in this year. And if he needs a political win, maybe he would do that. We've kind of seen with NAFTA and the trade deal with China that he's been willing to accept something pretty similar to what was out there before. Maybe he does the same thing in Iran, looking for some kind of political victory. I'm very skeptical of that being the case. I think he's going to kind of stagnate on foreign policy, especially if the Democrats end up with one of the more centrist candidates, Buttigieg, Biden, Booker. We've seen that these people are just reactionaries to Donald Trump. And so if Donald Trump's policy is make a deal with Kim, their policy is going to be, we cannot make a deal with the North Koreans until they denuclearize. If Trump decides he wants to withdraw from Afghanistan, they're going to say this isn't the right time, wants to withdraw from Syria, this isn't the right time, and he's a Putin puppet, wants to do arms control, this isn't the right time, Putin's too dangerous, Trump isn't the right guy, he's a Putin puppet. So I think there's going to be a lot of resistance from those areas. Once you get a little bit more on the progressive side, like Bernie or Tulsi, I don't think you have to worry about that quite so much. And even Elizabeth Warren has been willing to say in some cases, like Afghanistan, well, the president's decision to get out there is right. And so, maybe they're, depending on who the Democrat nominee is and who Trump is really running against, if it's Warren, maybe he can get one of these kind of things done. Of course, then it seems like a smaller political victory to me. I'm concerned that Trump would just lose interest in that case and really just focus on calling her Pocahontas the whole time. So I will say I'm optimistic about 2020. And I guess it's not that I think that anything good may happen in 2020 as far as a decision that a politician is going to make, especially, under their own, like, this is my calculation. However, I really do think we have a chance here to raise the discussion about U.S. foreign policy. It maybe made some progress that way. To put this into the mainstream, to help people to realize the tragedy of the U.S. foreign policy, that it makes us less safe, the immorality of it, all the people it's murdering overseas, the destabilization that's going to wreck, the areas of the world for the coming decades, if not centuries. Those are all problems created by the U.S. empire, and it needs to be a priority of Americans. And if we decide that we can't really care about what's going on in Iraq, then we at least have to switch the narrative to the default position being, if we can't articulate a good case for war, that means no war. Yeah, so, let's fight the battle with the people, get them talking about this, help them to realize how important U.S. foreign policy, all the money we waste on the American lives. As the great Scott Horton says, attack the right from the right and the left from the left. And we're just going to do that throughout 2020. And with all the politics going on, I think there's going to be a lot of room for us to express those viewpoints since we're right about everything. I think it's going to make it pretty easy for us to make a little bit of ground. But as far as, Trump actually doing anything or, the Democrats put up Mayor Pete or something like that, I'm not, hugely optimistic about the politics side, but I think the people may start moving in the right direction here. All right. So I can't thank my audience enough and all my supporters enough for how amazing 2019 was. About halfway through the year, I started working at antiwar.com as an assistant editor. Scott's kind of come on this show and explained my role there. But that it's been a lot of work, but man, the amount of things that I've learned, working with Scott Horton and Eric Garris is absolutely unbelievable. I'm sure that the show has improved greatly from this time last year. Just with all the extra knowledge that I've gained, and all the things that I've had to learn to be able to do that job. So, it's been an absolutely amazing experience, working there. Like I said, I think I've grown a lot from it. And it's also, just kind of great to, be working with that team. So, someplace I so frequently went to find the news, and now I get to be part of, putting that together. So that's really awesome. Recently I've been, given the official title of news editor at the Libertarian Institute. Not too much is changing, at least as of now, as far as what I'm doing at the Libertarian Institute. You'll still find the show on the homepage. You'll still find the daily news roundup that I write on the homepage. As always, I'm trying to improve the news roundup. Maybe add in more detail, try to pick a little bit of a wider variety of the stories, get a little bit more kind of news and other libertarian issues in there, is one of my goals for 2020. I'm always trying to improve everything I do. But make sure you guys are checking that out and sharing it. Most of the time it's actually a little bit more than just the show notes pages. For those of you who listen to the show and check out the show notes of the Libertarian Institute and you see all those links. Those are, the pieces of my news roundups that I picked to talk about on the show, but there is more in the roundups. So I've been doing those for over 3.5 years now. I've put together well over 1,000 of them. And, that body of work is something that I am very proud of and very grateful to be a part of the team, at the Libertarian Institute with Scott Horton, Pete Raymond, Sheldon Richmond, Phil Gibson. And, there's some great contributors who write there pretty frequently too. As far as the show goes, it has grown some in 2019. I had some pretty lofty goals after, kind of the just jump in success that I had in 2018 for the show in 2019. And I'll be honest, I didn't quite do as well with the show. But that said, I did pick up, quite a few other duties and responsibilities, as well as, actually having some advancement in my day job as well. And so it's just been an extremely busy year. And unfortunately, maybe those extra things that I've could have done for the show, I didn't have time for. But nonetheless, all the listeners have just done so much work to make the show grow, that it's still grown in 2019. And if I knew what the show would be like, when I started, it'll be 3-year anniversary here, in February. And, had I known that I would be going on 450 episodes and the number of downloads I'm getting every month is still going up. December of 2019 was the best month for the history of the show. And I was shocked since, usually the holiday months, you have a little bit of a downtime just because people don't listen quite as much over the holidays. But again, best month in the history of the show. And that was because, all of you people, went out there and shared it and did so much work. So, still looking to improve the show. I will say that coming up probably before the spring, there's going to be, quite the revamping of the show. Don't worry. I'll still be putting out, 3 episodes a week and covering much of the same stuff that I am now, but I think it's time to give the show a little bit of a facelift and, really, turn it into and take it to the next step, the next level. And, I think I'm prepared to do that in the coming year, and I'm very excited about that. So within the next month or two, I'll be making bigger announcements. If you want to kind of little pieces of information and, I'm sure, be doing some, polling, posting up some graphics saying like, hey, people, what do you like to see? What looks good graphics wise and stuff like that. You could find that in the Facebook group, Foreign Policy Focus. Check out the show on Twitter at KYAAALE. As I've mentioned about 24 times in the show, you find it online at the Libertarian Institute, and donate to the show at patreon.com/foreignpolicyfocus.